Okay, thanks. It took us just a few minutes to get all the tracking documents. Want to welcome Representative Ellis Black to the committee. Ellis, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you. Expect a lot of good questions from you. So, anyway, thanks for. Do what? Just remember you asked for that. That's correct. Okay. First on the agenda, we'll go ahead and start with the DOT for the amended 08, and I think I saw Commissioner Abram here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They are passing out to you our amended 08 request and recommendations, governor's recommendations. Ours is actually very simple from an 08 standpoint. The difference in our budget, our request, is based on the projections that we received from the Revenue Department and our actual collection dollars. And the difference in those collections versus projections was $63,962,862. And how we're anticipating, how we're requesting that those dollars get allocated throughout our budget is through general obligation bond debt service. As you're well aware, the first thing that happens is the GO bond debt service comes right off the top of our motor fuel collections, as well as the CERTA debt service for our Garvey bonds. So the increase in those numbers would actually just pay our debt service for Garvey bonds and our GO bond obligations. And the recommendations is that the remainder of those dollars be put into our off-system and most system, which is, I'm sure you gentlemen are very much aware, is state aid, our state aid program for local assistance. So our request is actually pretty simple. Is that $63 million based on projections versus actual collections be expended debt service, and the remainder of those funds go to local area assistance programs.
Okay, I did have one question. I had asked Mr. Moffett, how much total debt do we have now? Does the department have? I know this is only debt service.
Yes, sir.
And I had asked Earl to get that, and I don't know if he's done it or not.
I think we have. I know that was one of the questions we looked at last time. Yes, sir. GO bonds is $1.56 billion. Garvey bonds from 2001 is $29 million. Garvey bonds from 03 is $268 million. Garvey bonds from 06 is $341 million. Our RIB bonds are $85. And CP, Earl? Okay, our commercial paper program. I'm sorry, I forgot about that one. It's $2.3 billion.
So the total amount is $2.3 billion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did he say? What is commercial paper?
It's actually a new program that was started, I guess, 2 years ago, and it's a new commercial paper program, and basically it's a different kind of debt. And it was just a trial. We were actually trying it out for the entire state. We're the first ones that have actually done a commercial paper program, and it's just a different type of debt.
Yeah. Could we get a copy of that, Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
I vaguely remember the commercial paper part of it. Didn't we pass legislation, Earl, to do that? I thought we did. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? We'll let these other guys come in. While I'm thinking about it, I was looking at I know we're just talking about the amended. I was looking through the budget document on the 09. And one of the things I've noticed is employees have gone up from like 5,800. You may not even be aware of this, from 5,800 from the department, say, 2 years ago, buddy, and now they're showing like 62,000. I mean, excuse me, 6,200 employees.
It was 5,768 employees as of last month. Now there are some budget numbers. There are budgeted positions, Mr. Chairman, but those we also carry what we call a lapse factor, and I'm sure you're familiar with the lapse factor. And that lapse factor actually is a significant number of positions. And Earl, I'm not sure how many positions are in the lapse factor now, but we're running around 5,768 as of last month.
So what you're saying, those were open positions and they just haven't been filled. So
Yes, sir.
there's probably 500 vacant positions right now.
Yes, sir. There's a large number of vacant positions.
312, and that lapse factor is unfunded positions. Even though we have authorized 6,000 some odd positions, we don't get funding for all those positions.
And we also, what happens, what shows up on our budget is you'll see the lapse factor as a deduction, and that lapse factor means that we can't fill those positions.
Okay. Hit your button down there, Representative Ellis. Okay.
I just found that, baby. Commissioner, last week you referred to the fact that there have been some commitments to local governments that there's not sufficient money to do these projects at this time. Do you have any time frame as to when you're going to have it worked out as to how many of these projects you're going to be able to go through with, and what's the status on these others?
Yes, sir. Actually, what we're doing is with the amended budget dollars that we have in our request, that would still leave us $24 million short for our local programs, for our state aid program. The LARP program is actually fully funded and it's moving along perfectly. Actually, has some great project criteria behind it, so we don't have a problem with LARP. But we do have and LARP is our local area resurfacing program. What we do have problems with are those state aid projects that we have $120.7 million worth of commitments, and we'll be $24 million short if these dollars actually go towards the program. Now, our plan is that we are going to be sending out letters to local and county governments to talk about which projects are priorities. For example, I met with a group out of Pierce County, and they didn't know we had all of those projects on our books and dated back sometimes to 2003 or earlier. And so we're going to be asking city and counties to help us prioritize those projects, and also taking into consideration the ones where right-of-way dollars have already been expended to help us figure out which ones we can proceed with. The second part of that is we are working on our contracts. Just to let you know, those state aid contracts were actually going out without contract dollars in them, so I had sort of like a blank commitment there, and they didn't have exhibits attached which had the plans and specifications that were actually incorporated in the documents. And so we are working with the Attorney General's office now to help us with those contracts. We anticipate that by July 1st we should be in a situation where we can start moving forward with a real active state aid program with a different list of project criteria and a true engineering list of project criteria. So we're shooting for July 1. Yes, sir.
You feel like it'll be July 1 before these counties will know whether or not these programs that they think have been approved and are coming?
We hope we're providing information daily. I can tell you that we're getting phone calls right and left about those projects, and we are actually providing information as quickly as we possibly can. Now, some of the ones that were committed to in the last few months, I can tell you that we are not proceeding with those projects because the projects were already over budget, and our program was already over budget. Therefore, we couldn't proceed with some of those. So, we are providing updates. In fact, every time they come to the office and every time they call in as to the status. And the interesting thing is that we did find that some of the local governments didn't know which projects were actually on our books. So we've been opening up our books and sharing that with the local communities to talk about which ones truly are their priority. And that's been very helpful for us and very helpful for them as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that. You said that the commitments that have been made the last 2 months, that you know you don't have funds to pay for those. Are you going to notify these local governments, go ahead and notify them that they have problems?
In fact, we've been doing that. Those last few days of commitments that were actually made is I'm actually having to pull some of those contracts, and we are picking up the phone and calling those county governments and city governments and letting them know. And so far we hadn't had to do too many of those. But some of them were mixed up in the 120.7. Some of them weren't. Some of them hadn't been through our budget office to have dollars assigned to them yet. And so it's a real different mix. I mean, some of them didn't have dollars, some of them did, some of them got put in the 120.7 million. So we are notifying as many as we possibly can right now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the Greta folks, and I think we're honored to have the Executive Director, former Representative Steve Stansel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You need to come to the microphone where we can see you on the internet. Didn't have this when you were here, so.
Well, you know, us old folks, we're not up to speed on all this high-tech stuff.
No, I understand.
On the supplemental budget, we have no change in our $4.8 million budget. We make this real easy.
Mr. Stansel, you showed me your W-2.
Pretty pitiful, wasn't it?
Yeah, you want to show it to the rest of the committee?
I'll be happy to share that.
I think it's fraud, but show it to them anyway.
Well, you know, I was hired under the austerity cuts that were going on right there and also.
Okay. I'm sure the committee will keep that private with nobody, confidential.
Yeah, but if you feel free to slip on.
Do you think he's overpaid Representative Hanner?
10% or at least.
Any questions for the Executive Director? I do have one, Mr. Stansel. I was reading this Metropolitan Atlanta Regional Transit map night before last, or trying to. Are you on this committee that drafts all these maps up?
No, sir, but some of the Greta staff are.
Oh, really? Have you ever looked at this map?
Yes, sir.
Could you read it? Could you read it?
It's the spaghetti stuff, isn't it?
It sure is.
But that's what you have to do when you got so much transit on the ground that you trying to get it in a piece of paper that people can carry around. We played with that thing and reduced it and whatnot. But if you have questions about a specific route, if I can't answer it, I sure got some folks that can.
So is it easier to look at the internet site than it is this map?
It's probably easier to go to whoever the service provider is.
Okay.
So if you went, say, Greta, you go to our website, that would lift ours out of all that. That's Cobb Transit, Gwinnett Transit, Clayton Transit, MARTA, and us. So there's 5 different service providers on that.
I was looking at Canton. Y'all got a trolley in Canton that shows. Y'all have one up there?
We have a rubber tire trolley bus that circulates inside the city that Cecil Pruitt was the mayor. Cecil put that in, and the county is now taking it over and put it with the county program that does the transportation.
So you don't have anything to do with that then?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, it was interesting. I pulled it out, and, for an elderly person to read this, it would be...
It's hard.
It is hard.
There's no doubt.
So, in fact, it put me to sleep.
But it was free. Georgia Power printed that for us at no cost. So.
Okay. Good to know. All right, number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first apologize to the chair for being a little tardy. I was stopped in the hall by several well-wishers that thought I was Carl Rogers on the way over here, and it delayed me. On a serious note, Mr. Stansel, first of all, accept my sincere congratulations that you don't have a supplemental request. That tells me that you indeed do manage your agency with a great deal of forethought and obviously wisdom. Could you maybe share with us how you're able to deal with fluctuations in fuel cost, which would seem to be huge?
You see that nice-looking
issues
young lady sitting next to Mr. Keys? She is a wizard, and she does our buying and stuff. We're up to about $2.77, I think, was what the last bulk that we bought. But it is something that's tough to do. But it's in the big scheme of the operation, the fuel cost is not near as much as the capital and the what we have to pay drivers and all that stuff. It is a part of it, but it's not a huge part.
I guess what I'm getting at is maybe the rest of us or other agencies could learn from you. I'm obviously complimenting you as well, but there's some method in this madness of this question. Is it possible, for instance, we hear from the educational community all the time that because of the spike in fuel costs, their ability to get the kids to school has gone up a lot. Do you buy futures in fuel so that you can tell for your budget ahead of time? I mean, how do you really deal with that?
April, you want to explain how you buy our fuel?
Actually, we order fuel off the statewide contract.
Hey, April, will you come up? April, we need you up here, please.
This is April King. She's our finance director.
We actually order fuel off the statewide contract through the state of Georgia, but the express budget is a very complicated budget. Everything's based on revenue hours, revenue miles, and we go through a tremendous amount of process with our budgeting. So we probably do tend to overestimate for circumstances like this.
I do have one more question since nobody else other than Chairman O'Neill is going to say something. Let's see. I was looking at the boardings, Steve, this boarding chart. There was nothing good on TV the night before. I was looking at all this.
I'm glad that I was on your mind, Mr. Chairman.
I was.
She was thinking about us.
Well, I'm just looking like, it shows Union City to downtown Gainesville, Union City to downtown Atlanta. You only had 3,103 boardings. Of course, I know you've just been doing that since first of 2007. Why would you keep a route going?
Well, that's a new route. That route didn't start until sometime in November.
So it wasn't a full 12 months.
No, sir.
Okay.
That was 1 month. And you'll.
How about Panola Road to Midtown? Was it the same way?
Same way. We started those same time.
Okay. Austell, Mapleton, Six Flags to downtown.
That one started a month or two before.
Was it?
The other two.
Okay. All right. That answers that question. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be back to see you on the big budget.
I think they've got your W-2 down there. Have you still got it, Mr. Lunsford? Okay. I got it down there for you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and do economic development. I think Ken Stewart's back from China, so we're glad you made it back safely. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We had no additions in our 08 amended either. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
okay.
Commissioner, I see where you requested $3 million for REBA funds. How do you stand with your REBA balances now?
We are fairly tight on a REBA balance right now. We've had a very good year in terms of recruitment, and that's typically how the REBA balance fluctuates. So business has been strong. We have some outstanding offers, and we won't know for some period of time and whether or not all those will be accepted, of course, and the projects will land here. But right now we started the year with $11,500,000 roughly in REBA. We've made offerings out of about that have been accepted of $6,800,000. And we have pending right at $3 million that are out, leaving us a balance of about $1,700,000, roughly.
These are very important funds in closing deals to come to Georgia, aren't they?
That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. That's how we compete with one of the ways we compete with the other states. We did a study here during the course of this last year to try to assess how well we compared to the other states statutorily and with their tax law. And we did it in a way of essentially building hypothetical companies, balance sheets and P&Ls and within different industry segments. and then place those companies down into our principal competition states, and there's 17 of them, to see how we compared in terms of our statutory as well as our discretionary ability. And we determined from a tax perspective we're actually in pretty good shape. Our big competition wields a fairly big stick in terms of discretionary funds, however, comparatively.
With 5 months to go, is this going to severely curtail your efforts in recruiting industry?
We don't think so. We're going to be very active in trying to find any source that we can to provide the incentive money. But this money is limited. That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Smyrie.
Commissioner, the tourism, give us a little update on. I know that that's a major industry for our state, and I know you have. That's an area that we all are interested in. Is everything, from a budgetary standpoint, is everything going to suit you?
Yes, we've had some, since we met in this forum last year, we've had some changes. Charlie Gatlin now is running the tourism and marketing division, and Kevin Langston is running specifically tourism. We feel like we've got a very strong team in place with them, along with all the other team members in tourism. Across the United States, and recalling from memory, our statistics are that we in 2006 is the last complete year we have tourists in the state, and it was about 61.3 million tourists, as I recall, came through Georgia. That's slightly down from the 2005. But we weren't specially treated in Georgia because tourist incidents or visitations were down in most all the other states as well from 2005 to 2006. The net of it is that the tourism industry still is the second largest economic engine in our state, second largest industry, so it's still very strong. We're trying to be much more strategic with our tourism efforts. Is Charlie Gatlin here, or Kevin? I don't think so. We're being much more strategic with how we're approaching tourism and identifying a set of initiatives to move our state up to number 5 in the country. That doesn't sound real big when you compare it to some of the others, but it's a pretty good move over the next few years for us. So it's an audacious goal for us to try to get there.
Good. Just wanted to hear that's ambitious, and look forward to helping any way we can, because tourism is a major industry, and we ought to treat it as a unit, as a component, as a business. And just as we give to other industries, and we ought to, from a philosophical standpoint, also try to do that as it relates to tourism. So thank you very much.
Well, it's one of the 3 legs within economic development, entertainment as well as tourism, and then economic development. So we put a significant amount of effort into that very large, economic engine of tourism for the state.
Thank you for your leadership.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Representative Lucas.
Let me pose a question for you. What would the Golf Hall of Fame done in Augusta as far as tourism?
I honestly don't know the numbers for the Golf Hall of Fame. I really don't know.
I mean, it's closed down now, but y'all don't have any idea what it would, if we had, if the money had gone to it, what kind of tourism? Since they got the Masters there, I would assume that would bring some interest in.
I'm certain you're right. I think it would. I certainly don't know the extent of it, and I don't believe the Golf Hall of Fame is closed down. If I understand correctly, the Golf Hall of Fame is still operating, I believe.
I thought it was dead since we didn't get the money to them.
No, they were. I was in Augusta for the induction ceremony about, I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And the Golf Hall of Fame still has 2 employees, as I understand. They're still operating. They are a pass-through for us. They're not part of our agency. They only pass through us.
Well,
any funding that's given to them.
Well, I would assume that y'all just keep up with figures when you start talking about tourism, because tourism basically makes those who are in business able to stay in business.
Yeah, golf is golf itself in the state is a very large industry, and and again, I'm going from memory. I think it was something over $2 billion in total economic impact on the state for golf overall for the state of Georgia. So yes, golf is big business. There's no question about it.
Mr. Lucas, are you finished?
I'm through.
Okay. Chairman O'Neill.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, hello. And let me say, first of all, thank you for the outstanding job you do for us. We very much appreciate that. And I want to echo the comments Representative Smyrie made. I too agree with him that tourism is huge business to this state. And with that as a segue, last year we dealt with what I will call the Kentucky model. I don't know where it wound up. I just know it didn't get signed into law, but it was a large attraction, tourist attraction kind of tax situation where, beginning with a $25 million expenditure by developer and above, that there would be a ratable refund. I think it was a fourth of the de novo sales tax generated by the ticket sales. That seemed to me to be kind of a no-lose for Georgia. I mean, it was to help the developers in a sense as an incentive, but it didn't cost us anything till all the new money had been added to our coffers that we didn't have any of before. I would be interested to know your comments on that legislation if you recall it, and also just to get my questions all out at the same time. We're looking this year at some fairly substantial, I guess what I call it modification, but maybe improvements to our film industry credit legislation. I thought we made a very bold move a couple of years ago to get on the A list for situs of the film industry, and unfortunately, what happened is several other states saw what we did and sought to emulate us, and we didn't get the full effect. Yet we got, I thought, a very positive effect from our tax credit scenario. Would you be comfortable today with speaking to both? I realize those are big picture items. They're not in the supplemental. This is not an ambush. If you're not comfortable, that's okay. You can tell me you'll look into it. But would you be comfortable in commenting on either of those two issues?
I'd be pleased, particularly to comment on the second. We have, I think both of those were a component of House Bill 451 last year, if I recall right. We have spent, along with the industry film board, have spent some time in the interim studying the impact and the incentives from state to state, particularly the incentives in those states that are being more successful in attracting film producers and other types of productions in their states. And it's what seems to be clear in building our scatter diagrams and other types of tools to compare is that indeed there is a relationship between incentives and the number of investments that are made in the state. We still find ourselves being very strong in terms of our inherent production capacity here. We still have a lot of employees in production studios, post-production and otherwise, that are here in the state that are citizens in our state that work, even go out of state to work. But clearly there is a relationship between incentives, because the studios, much like much of business, much other business, is very much geared to a current return. This financial is what it's all about, and indeed within the industry it's all about the money. And I think at one time it was not so much about the money as it was other drivers and just being close to certain assets or scenery. But with technology, they're able to adapt a lot better. So we still feel like that we're being successful with our incenting companies to invest here, particularly in film production. But we also our data is showing that there's clearly a relationship between the incentives and the ones that invest. And I'm at this point, Mr. Chairman, not comfortable talking about the balance of 451.
Thank
you. Commissioner, why don't you tell us where you've been? I know you had a trip. Why don't you tell the committee where all you've been? I know you made several trips to China, and you had told me you couldn't make the last meeting because you were going to speak to some Chinese, and kind of brief us on that and what's going on. And of course, the governor's got a lot of open offices overseas and things of that nature. So, why don't you brief the committee on that?
Well, we currently have 10 international. Speaking just on the international side, we have 10 international offices. One which has been in place for 22 years, and that's in Seoul, Korea. So this is not new for the state at all. But we're in the process of adding one additional office, and that'll be in Beijing in China. And we're in the process of getting it all put together and the people hired so that we can have a formal opening in late March associated with the Shanghai inaugural flight that Delta is going to have nonstop from here to Shanghai. This particular trip, and the reason I missed the first meeting, I apologize. I had the rare opportunity to address a audience between 400 and 600 C-level Chinese company executives, and strictly just talk about Georgia. This group was trying to get comfortable with two things: is how do they invest offshore, is one, and two, how do they address their concerns related to product liability that they are hearing so much about. That we all hear much about here. They certainly do there as well, lead-based paint or whatever the issue might be, because it's obviously affected their markets. We were the only state that was invited, and I was able to give a keynote address to the group, and so it was pretty much a rare opportunity to meet, not only do the discussion, but meet with individual companies. And we targeted those companies consistent with our strategic industries, and we went obviously through the list and decided which ones had the capacity, robustly growing, to invest offshore and would fit well within the kind of companies we wanted to grow in Georgia. And so we met with those individual companies as part of the process as well. Also had an opportunity to have sit next to an individual that's called the chairman in China, and he's as you may know, about 90% of the Chinese companies, either in whole or in part, are owned still by the Chinese government. And this particular individual is the chairman of all of those collective companies, and so we've made some good connections both with the government as well. So I think it'll pay some significant dividends. You could ask the question of why China, and China, as we all know, is still growing rapidly, and they're beginning to diversify some of their investments offshore as well, and are getting into other places. And we're still the world's largest market here in the United States, and the Southeast is, of course, projected to grow faster than any other part of the country. And fortunately, we're right in the middle of it. And so we're in a great place, and we've had a few Chinese companies that have invested here now, which gives a lot of confidence to the others that are coming in that this is a place to come. And so we also spent a lot of time giving them confidence that this was a safe place to invest, and they'd get plenty of help when they came here. And there'd been other companies successful doing it.
Good.
It's a sales pitch.
Great. I don't think there's any other questions. Thanks for being here. And again, we appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
And Chris Clark, Chief.
Mr. Chairman, I've been to Blairsville, Donaldsonville, Darien, and Waycross lately.
Not before, though, right?
Sir?
When you worked for the other agency, not before, right?
That's right.
Okay.
I tried.
Drill down, Mr. Chairman.
That's right. Mr. Chairman, GFA has one budget change. It's on page 5 of 10, number 1514 on your tracking document. It's part of the governor's reservoir and water management package that he discussed in the state of the state. It's $40 million. There's a companion to that in the FY09 budget that we'll discuss in coming weeks, I'm sure. Just to give you a little idea of how that money will be spent, the idea is that it will be done with grant loan combinations. It will require local match, will help local communities. For the short term, we're looking at helping communities address the drought that we're in right now with water management systems, things like repair, construction, enhancement. I'll give you some examples like interconnectivity to other systems. Right now we've got 2 projects, one up in Habersham County where they're interconnecting over to Stevens to use some of their water. And GFA recently did a loan grant to Hogansville so that their reservoir intake valve had dropped below the level, so we helped them helping them hook onto the city of LaGrange so they can provide water. So we'll be doing things like that for short term, and then to help communities long term prepare to better handle the drought that'll come in the future. Things like land acquisition, permitting, mitigation, construction, and other support systems for reservoirs. The state water plan has as a priority for reservoirs that first of all we look at deepening and adding capacity at the existing reservoirs. We look at conversion of recreational reservoirs. And then we look at multi-jurisdictional reservoir, new construction. I will say that I'm not sure if Commissioner Dykes is here, from our friends from Soil and Water here, and I know that we've talked before. In these previous meetings, they're looking at some of their impoundment ponds. It might be an opportunity there, and we could use some of these funds for that. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you did such a good job. I don't think there's any questions. Chairman O'Neill, you don't have a question? Okay, what's your number? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I do have something I need to give you. You going to be hanging around a little while?
Sure.
Or, okay.
Yes, sir.
I just got something handed to me about an hour ago I need to give to you.
Very good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, forestry. Robert, Interim Director Robert Ferris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. We have no additions on our 08 supplemental. I would like to take just a couple of minutes to explain that, if that's all right. The Georgia Forestry Commission experienced a horrendous fire season this past year. The record-breaking drought led to record-breaking wildfire activity. That resulted in some tremendous expenditures. And I did want to mention that the state appropriations for the GFC in 2007 were $39.7 million. Our expenditures last year were $81.5 million. $65 million of that was in fire control expenses. So that left us with trying to find a shortfall of $36 million in how to cover the fire control cost. This is illustrated on the back of the literature that was passed out at the last meeting. The orange block is that $36 million that we were short. And I wanted to say a couple words about where we're covering that. We're still working on that. The governor's emergency funds kicked in $7 million to help cover those costs. We're working with FEMA to procure fire management assistance grants, which cover up to 75% of eligible fire control cost. And then also the Forestry Commission deferred purchasing equipment to the tune of $881,000 last year so that we could roll those funds into regular operating to cover the fire expenses. We've been working with OPB To cover those costs, OPB has agreed to cover a $2.7 million shortfall in fire control costs through the governor's emergency funds. We do not have a request in our GFC budget for that, but there is a request for supplemental funds within the governor's budget request. Regarding the $881,000 in equipment that we deferred purchase on last year, OPB advised that those funds did not qualify for supplemental request and recommended that we move those into the FY09 bond request. So you will be seeing those in the FY09 request, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we talked the other day, we talked a little bit about the cost associated with the windrows and all that y'all had to go down and put through the properties down around Waycroft's area. Did I understand you right at that time to say that the landowners themselves would be, basically it would cost them about $4,000 a square mile to remove those? That would be the cost that the landowner would have to bear on these?
Per linear mile, yes, sir. Average cost to repair those berms on the large fires in South Georgia is about $10,000 per mile. With the cost share program we mentioned earlier, the federal government would pick up 50% of the cost. The Georgia Forestry Commission pick up 10% of the cost, and landowner 40%.
Another question, Mr. Chairman. Do you know what the total cost associated with this? I mean, how many miles did y'all do that down there?
Close to 300 miles of fire breaks around the perimeter of the swamp.
One more question, Mr.
Many, many miles of fire breaks.
So what happens if a landowner didn't want you to come in there and do it? I mean, I realize y'all were trying to stop the fire at the time, and that y'all did a wonderful job down there doing that. But just come in there on the property, and maybe the fire never come that way, and they never had any cost, so to speak, associated with it. I mean, we've got a lot of people down there that's lost a lot of acres, and it's cost them a pile of money. And now we're going to charge them with more money to go in there and take down these burns. And it's a concern of mine to a lot of these individuals down there, because there's no way for them to recoup that cost.
No, sir, there's not on the berm repairs, and there were over $65 million worth of timber lost in the fires in southeast Georgia on private land holdings. That's family farms. Over 20,000 acres of forest land need to be regenerated. We've established a public-private fire relief fund, working with the forestry community to try and help procure funding to reforest those acres. Projected costs are right at $8 million to reforest the 20,000 acres.
Is there, are you aware of any type of avenues that these landowners could seek in helping to recover their cost on a personal basis?
Well, their options are, and of course we held a lot of landowner meetings down there, is to claim a casualty loss if they qualify. But as far as any type of insurance programs, no, sir, it's pretty much a clear loss for those folks. We have been working through a number of different organizations, Natural Resource Conservation Service being one of them, to procure federal funding, and to date we've procured about $3 million in public and private partnership dollars to assist the landowners there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
28. Is that Ellis? Okay.
How about bring me up to date on something, if you would, please, sir. In years past, a large amount of forest firefighting equipment was owned by the private companies, the big timber companies, and over the years, there's been more of those that have disposed of their equipment. What's the status on the total number of tractors and equipment that's available? And
it continues to decline, sir. Back in 1989, we had 187 cooperator crawler tractors out there. Those were industry tractors with fire plows on the back that would be there side by side with the Forestry Commission fighting fires. That number now, the last check we did was below 20. We've got less than 20 industry cooperator tractors out there, and that is a trend that's happening. I know Ray and Neer has discussed dropping their equipment down there, which would be another 5 tractors in Georgia, dropping us even lower. And that has greatly increased the cost of controlling and fighting these wildfires without those 180-something cooperators out there.
You say 180 cooperators or 180 tractors?
The cooperator tractors.
Tractors. Now, at the time that the state has dropped, the private individuals have dropped from 180 to 20. What's been the numbers of the state tractors were available to fight fires?
The number of state tractors has remained pretty consistent there. Right at across the state, approximately 340 crawler tractors.
Thank you.
Commissioner, while I'm thinking about it, I know you deferred, what, $873,000? Is that what you said on equipment?
881.
881. How about the environmental cabs? Were you able, was that part of the deferment to put the environmental cabs on the plows?
No, sir. We just cut back on the number of crawlers that we replaced. We did put environmental cabs. We are ordering environmental cabs on our crawler equipment now. One of the last states in the South to do so, but we are doing that.
How many have you got now? How many cabs do you have now?
I know we ordered 10 and
13 more.
So that'd make 23 right now.
So the men and women that are using those like those, you know?
Absolutely.
Good.
We
Okay.
did have a situation in the large fire this past season in southeast Georgia where our firefighters actually got off of our equipment and over into a North Carolina tractor that was equipped with an environmental cab. So there is a definite safety feature involved with that.
Very good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, agriculture. I was hoping Chairman Snow was going to speak, but we got former Speaker Terry Coleman.
Well, Chairman Snow, serves 2 capacities, Mr. Chairman. He's
a judge too, isn't he?
Well, he in his off work time, he's chairman of your fan club.
I'm your driver too.
We got another problem. He lost his razor. But if you'll help us with our budget, we'll get that handled.
Okay, I got one I can let him use.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for introducing everybody else but your wife.
She had told me not to do that, so that was, if you want to do that, you're certainly.
No, I'm just glad you introduced me before you thought more of me than you did your wife. I'm impressed. Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting us come. As department has only one request, and that is that you correct some technical error that happened either in OPB or in the governor's budget, and that is on funding. You got it there, Mr. Snow? We're sure it's a technical error that it didn't get included. Last year, y'all included $68,000 for 4 positions to fund the last quarter of the Homeland Security positions, and they're passing those out.
Okay.
That's the only thing we're asking for.
Are you saying that capital outlay is what was left out? Is that what you're saying?
No. With the capital outlay, we were, that's in the 09 budget.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's one that, actually the architect, we sent him back to the drawing board. We think we can do that for $29 million. If we'll look at that if you don't mind in 09 though.
Is it architect or architect?
Well, it depends on where you're from. Some people call them architects, and some people call them architects.
Okay. Southeast Georgians, there was a former representative used to call it.
Absolutely.
What do you call it?
Architects.
Architect.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're paying them, you can call them anything, you know.
True.
Mr. Chairman, any questions?
We do have a question from Representative Roberts.
Well, and you handed it out to him. I was going to ask you about that project. Do you want, real quick, the department did, you want to talk about the first proposal that come back and how y'all sent them back?
Did you give them a copy of the total proposal on that, Mike? Okay. What happened about 3 years ago, I think, money was put in for planning, approximately $200,000 for planning a facility and consolidating our labs, moving most of the labs off Capitol Hill, taking a fuel lab that's outdated and we've outgrown from Forest Park, combining it with the weights and measures lab that's now at the end of the 5th runway, as you might imagine, and next to I-75 with 4 more lanes on it. Create somewhat of a bad environment for trying to do precise measurements, and it's certainly interfered with the lottery numbers you ask us to help you with, where we weigh the lottery balls. But we would combine the fuel lab, weights and measures lab, the seed lab, which is now in Tifton, with most of our lab here in Atlanta. And the delegation from Tift County requested that we, by legislation last year, place it in Tifton where there's a lot of ag synergy, and we would move that lab down there. Originally, we looked at a green field space on the campus there at ABAC or on the RDC campus, but it was going to be too expensive. So we went back and looked. That was the $41 million. We went back and looked at the existing seed lab, which is approximately 20 years old now, and decided that if we have 15 acres that we already have title to, if we could take the old seed lab, turn it into administrative space, build a new lab for all the labs, and attach it to the existing lab, then we could do it for about $29 million. I think it'd be about 50 or so people, probably move from here 30 people and add 15 or 20 people to the.
Okay.
Just so, I mean, it was a situation where it was a lot more, and they had them go back to the drawing board again and come back, and we appreciate that. That was too high at the time.
Okay. But this is not in the governor's recommendation, or is?
No, the governor looked at it, but he asked us to go back, and between the time we got another architect to look at it and change the location and the design on it, he had already finished his budget recommendations.
Okay. And you mentioned whose district is this in?
Well, it's Representative Roberts, Representative Scott, and Senator Carter.
Actually, in Representative Scott's part of Tift County, I represent Tift County.
Okay.
Good project.
I'm sure it is. We moved some dollars last year. If my memory serves me right, on the weights and measures, didn't we do that?
No, we actually put the language in the budget.
Okay, language in the budget. I knew we did something. Okay. Okay. Any other questions from anybody? I do have one I need to ask.
Would you mind waiting till Mr. Hanner gets off the phone?
Her name is Linda also, isn't it? Okay. One of the things I know the department does is inspect grocery stores for food safety and issues of this nature. Do you all charge for inspections?
No,
My first question.
we do not. As a matter of fact, we don't even charge a license fee. However, it's been discussed, Office of Planning and Budget asked us to look at that, and we have some folks in-house looking at that, compared to, say, restaurants that DHR, the Health Department, inspects and charges a fee. We don't, but we are looking at that. OPB has gotten very strong lately in bringing in revenue that might not be detrimental to to the business, something that they might have budgeted in otherwise, and looking at see how they could do that, bring in more fees, and help pay for some of the expenses or offset some of the expenses on some of these inspections.
The other thing I was going to ask, there seems to be a duplication with the local health departments. I know in the area I represent, and of course we have health departments, I guess, in every county. I hope we do. I'm sure we do. They're charging fees for restaurants to come in and inspect themselves, and now there are food safety courses. Are y'all requiring people in grocery stores because they have ready-to-eat food, they're cooking? Do y'all have anything like that?
On the grocery stores, we check mostly for freshness, out-of-date items, food items. We don't do if it's food that is served ready to eat as a restaurant or a deli service, health department does that. We check for the meats, make sure the meats are dated right, make sure they're labeled, make sure that they are their weights are right, and no mislabeling. As you know, one of the things in restaurants and food is a species identification, which we're in the middle of now. We're looking at that. But no, to answer your question, the health department has to do with restaurants and food that's supposedly ready to eat, I believe.
So they're inspecting the grocery stores too?
If they have a food service establishment in the grocery store, I believe it's in their responsibility.
That's news to me.
But ours is freshness, the labeling, the weights, and those kind of things.
I got you. Okay. It's Representative Black.
Chairman Rogers mentioned fees for inspection. Do you have the amount of money that's generated by fines and penalties for these inspections that fail?
I don't have the fines and penalties. I know that they all go to the general fund right now. So we don't have any really. As a matter of fact, we last year passed a couple of bills which did away with what they call nuisance license fees, or I don't know if they got all. I don't think they got all the way through both houses, but we discussed them, and we're waiting now to. We're waiting now to look at that. The way the wording was reasonable vetoed was it left it open. I understood too much in the veto message, but I don't have a figure on how much because it's really not that much right now.
I have been told in the past that many of these services generate more revenue than what is spent on the inspection service.
They don't generate near what it costs to inspect them. For instance, we had at one time a $10 fee on a licensed operated grocery store, I think it was. And I'll have to ask somebody that's been there longer than me, but I'm not sure we even charge that anymore. We just require them to be licensed.
I may have been misled in the past about some of the...
You said that they were charging...
Some of the services that the Department of Agriculture is performing generates more money in fees, fines, than what is spent on doing the inspection.
I don't believe so.
That's not the case on the fertilizer inspection?
I'd have to go back and look, Mr. Black, but I'm not sure. I don't think the fertilizer... I'm not sure what the license is. I'll find out, though. I'll let you know about that. I know on the grocery and the grocery stores and other food establishments like that, they don't bring in enough. Don't bring in much at all.
How about the gasoline pumps?
All of those are in conjunction with a with a food store or another store. We inspect them, but we don't. The fee is so small, if any. I'd have to get that, but I don't think we charge if it's $10.
I ain't talking about the fee for inspecting. I'm talking about the fines for the ones that fail.
I'll have to find out. I don't think we have that much of a that goes into the general fund.
Hmm.
Yeah, we've had quite a bit of equine. We have a big case in Pike County. We have several $100,000 fines.
Where we have a case like Mike's talking about with the Pike County case, where we sell the horses and we get a fine for owner, and it's a negotiated fine usually with the owner's or the violator's attorney. As I said, that goes in the general fund, but the actual auction, what we sold, the abused horses from the Pike County case just barely paid the cost of keeping them in impound and feeding them and sending them to the vet, getting them up and running again, no pun intended, up and going again, equal just about what it cost or what we brought in from the sale. But the fines I'll have to check on. We have had some in pest control, as you might imagine, where we regulate pest controls and pest control companies, where they might not do an adequate job or might have some pattern of not doing an adequate job, and they're fined for that, or if they spray in a school when children are present or something like that, and they get reported, and we find that they're violated, that rule or that reg, then they get fined. They also go back into the general fund. So
that was another one. That was another one I had been told that was generating far more revenue than was being spent doing the inspections.
that'd be it. Well, I'll have to find out, but it'd be hard for me to believe that it raised that much money. We have 350 or 400 inspectors out in the field, and I just can't imagine that we bring in that kind of fine. I'll get it back for you before the end of the week.
Thank
you. Okay, no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, PSC, I know y'all don't have anything, but do you want to make some comments? Chuck, saw an article in the paper about you yesterday. Yep. Was it accurate or was it wrong?
Actually, it was fairly accurate.
Oh, good.
So, couldn't ask for much. I'm just here really to listen to see if you have any questions or comments.
I don't see any, so thanks for being here.
Happy
Bill Miller, you want to say anything while you're here, or are you just observing? Okay. Okay, Department of Community Affairs, I think, is next. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, I'm John Ellis with Community Affairs. Commissioner Beatty couldn't be here. We don't have a request in the amended 08, but I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. I did see soil water conservation come in, so Brent.
Sir, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think we have one item I have on page 52 of 59. I'm not sure if I'm on the same copy as you gentlemen. One item, provide maintenance funding for 20 watershed dams with the potential to serve as water supply reservoirs, potential add of $500,000. As discussed at last meeting, we're in the process of completing a watershed study of our existing structures. This funding would go to provide maintenance on those 20 structures that would be identified as potential water supply reservoirs where they currently serve as flood control reservoirs. And it's an estimated cost of $25,000 per dam times 20 dams for the $500,000 figure proposed, and it would fund basic tree removal on the site and other heavy maintenance items on the site itself, and possibly then move on into a water supply type reservoir after those maintenance issues are completed. But go through the standard bid process. $25,000 is just the estimated cost per dam. That's the only add.
No questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I think I covered all the departments, did I not? I did have one individual, Steve, with Georgia Civil War Trails, I think was going to be here. He might have left. Okay. If he's not here. What was his name? Steve Longley or something like that? Okay. He just wants $1 million, so. Okay, we'll finish up the amended, this amended probably tomorrow or the next day, so y'all just be ready for a call meeting just to pass it out. So we'll spend most of our time on the 09 budget. So thank you.